because I can control those different variables, I can be smart and clever and go, okay, why don't I give you a lot more money up front, much lower terms, which means in the long run, I'm going to pay a lot less, but you feel happier as the seller because you're getting this big chunk of money.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I am your host, Nick Olsen. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast. Today's guest is Etinosa Agbonlahor, a behavioral economist and the CEO of Decision Alpha. With over a decade of global experience, she has advised both major financial institutions, venture-backed startups, and how behavior shapes financial outcomes. Her work has been featured in outlets like MarketWatch and Morningstar. She is the author of a book she wrote called How to Talk to Your Partners or Parents About Money, bringing a unique perspective to both personal and financial or professional and financial decision making. Today, we're going to dive into how behavioral economics can help M&A advisors and business owners overcome the pricing confidence gap, move beyond benchmarking, and ultimately drive stronger valuation outcomes. Eddie, how you doing? Thanks for joining the show today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Nick. I'm excited for the conversation.
Awesome. So Decision Alpha, what is Decision Alpha? What is the work that you do? Kind of just lay that all out for our guests just to start off the conversation here.
Absolutely. So we are a pricing strategy and financial well-being firm. We work with owners and CEOs who are at a pricing inflection point, whether they're launching a new offer, they're repositioning in the market, or they're bringing in more revenue, yet profit is flat. What we're trying to do is help them fix those situations to deliver stronger profits and healthier businesses. We have a team of behavioral economists, so everyone is versed either in pricing strategy or in understanding the psychology behind how people make financial decisions. Because our approach to pricing is not just from the Excel spreadsheets and the numbers and the internal business cost, but also customer perception and value perception as well. So we're bringing those two points of view together.
Can you define and what your definition of behavioral economist is?
Yes. So a behavioral economist is somebody who studies the psychology behind how people make financial decisions. So it's not just, our standard perspective, especially if you're in finance or, in economics, is we assume that everybody's trying to maximize utility, right? We're going to make the best financial decision all the time. The reality is that people make more than 10,000 decisions every day. So as soon as you wake up, whether to turn your alarm clock on or off, what to eat for breakfast, what mortgage to get, all the way up, we're making thousands of decisions every day. So when it comes to our financial decisions, it's actually impossible for people to make the best possible financial decisions all the time. So there's little quirks and ways our brains interact with those financial decisions that allow you as a business owner to create some leverage in how you present your prices, how you steer customers one way or another. That's kind of what we explore as behavioral economists.
So how has that approach helped you with the clients that you work with? Because it's interesting. You say you make 10,000 decisions a day. The one about your money is pretty important. So you want to be focused and making sound decisions. How do you work with clients, and how do you kind of just take us through how you start the conversation of just understanding what their mindset is around their finances, and how do you know if they're making, how do you get to kind of peel the onion back to know like what their trends are, or how they're making decisions, or how you can kind of get to that level?
Yes. So we talk to our clients when we're doing pricing strategy work. We say that pricing is essentially like a house, right? You've got your cost floor, which is everything it takes to keep the lights on. You've got your willingness to pay ceiling, which is what is the maximum the customer is willing to pay for whatever your service is. In between, you've got your alternatives, your competitors, the context, all of those are sort of pillars. But when we start to talk to customers and understand what is that ceiling, that willingness to pay, that's where a lot of this has to come into consideration, right? We're trying to understand, how do you view this product or service? How do you value it? And is the way you value it more than the price that we're asking for it? And so what we might do when we sit with the client is we start by understanding, yes, cost BAU, right? So you must understand what the costs are. But then we want to understand what actually is the value that you see you're delivering to customers and who are the different customers segments that you serve. We move that then into the customer research where we're sitting down with the customers to understand, hey, what is the value you get from this? Whether it's functional value, like, you know, we sell screwdrivers and that help, the value we get is that it helps us create holes faster or unscrew, screws easier. But whether that's functional value, what are the emotional benefits you get from this, right? I feel safer because this thing helps, my alarm system makes me feel safe at night so I can live in a house that I want to with my family, all the way to aspirational values, right? I buy the Dior bag because it makes me feel like somebody who can afford it, and I socially signal to other people that I'm one of them, right? So we want to understand what are the different levels of value people get from the product, the service that we're evaluating. That's one thing. We also then want to understand for those different elements of value we're trying to get to and understand, how would you price that? What is the number you would put around that? What's too high? What's too low? What's, so low that you wouldn't even consider to worry about the quality? And we're trying to get to understand a place where we have a range of, this is what's too low, this is what's too high across the different customer segments that you serve. And then we can take that into then actually framing the price and understanding, how do you show this to customers? And we can talk a lot more about that. But how do you show this to customers in a way that's going to resonate with them and nudge them one way or another when they're choosing to work with you or choosing to buy your product, etc. So we essentially take people through those three steps. The final fourth step of our pricing framework is testing. We believe that pricing should be a feature and not a reaction. So every so often, we encourage our owners and the folks we work with, sit down, look at your prices. Let's see if there's an opportunity for more margin in what you're doing.
What work do you do with clients who might be considering an exit of their company and helping them understand the value in probably their largest asset they have?
What we're trying to do when we're working with people who are considering selling their company is we want to understand, is there any better upside that they're not currently kind of exploiting, number one. Number two, we also want to understand what are some of the risks that a potential buyer might see and flag. So for example, most of the sales founder-led sales, right? That's something we need to consider. But we really want us to be able to sit down with the company's customers, prospects, folks in the pipeline and have that conversation to understand, why are you buying this? If you weren't buying this, what would you be using to solve the problem, right? What are the alternatives involved in this? And then also, how high would you go, right? What is the range of the pricing that you go? Because then that allows you as an owner to understand, here is the range, here's some more margin or like some upside that I haven't yet kind of tapped into. And that's something you can take back when you're putting the deal together and say, here's some work that we've done. Here are the customers, and we can stand behind any numbers we put because we've done this research with our customers as well.
So would you say you're kind of looking at it from a lens of a buyer and helping them understand their upside? Why would they want to buy this company? Where does that value meet this is maybe a little too high? Like, I'm assuming you're kind of looking at it from that lens.
Exactly, because when we worked in this space, it's not just during the acquisition, it's also post-acquisition, right?
Yeah.
We know a lot of value is lost once the company is purchased. So post-acquisition, we're looking to understand, now that you have this company, how do you incorporate the current customers with your customer base? A lot of times you buy a company and the pricing is all over the map because, again, sales has been doing whatever they wanted, discounts all over the place. You've just created bad pricing behaviors that you've inherited. So how do we kind of inherit and institute a pricing discipline? How do we make sure we're normalizing prices, etc.? We work with a performance management platform. They had been acquired by a large executive coaching firm. And one of the things that they wanted to do was just standardize their pricing because it was, again, all over the map. Sales had done whatever they wanted to do, and customers were trained to push and negotiate and not accept until they got a discount. And so our work with them was to understand, given the different customer segments that you're onboarding through this acquisition, what pricing makes the most sense? How do you put it in front of them? Are there new bundles and packaging you need to consider now based on the synergies between the offerings and what you've acquired, etc.? And so we're really working with the buyer, not just during the due diligence process, but we also want to make sure when you bring this in-house, you can reap the value that you've been sold.
When do you have that conversation? Because you think of an exit process. Are you having that during due diligence beforehand, or are you waiting till you kind of sale has been done? Now you got to figure out how the two companies can merge together.
During due diligence is when we want to do some of that upfront market research to understand how customers actually perceiving this. Is there extra like margin on the table, willingness to pay, etc. If we can insert that process as quickly as possible, we want to do that. But then afterwards, when it's coming in house, is when we actually have the opportunity to do a broader piece of research, do more data analytics, etc., to then be able to say, here's how you incorporate it into your existing portfolio, right? This is what you do with the pricing. This is what we need to do with the existing customers, and really create that strategy and then work with the customers to implement it or the clients to implement it.
If you have two or three buyers interested in your client's company, are you doing any analysis, value analysis there to see like who is the best fit, who has the biggest upside, maybe the most, the most promising, post sale, integration, anything like that you're doing where maybe you have choices of, three buyers, want to figure out which one is the best one?
We haven't done that yet, but I do think it's an interesting opportunity to be able to say, looking at the customer set that these three different buyers have, here's where synergies may emerge, here's where it might be easier to merge the cultures of the company, but even better, here's where it might be easier to bring the pricing of both together. We haven't had that scenario yet, but I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting because it just dawned on me as you're talking. I'm like, well, typically when you're in the due diligence, your buyer's, under LOI with one buyer. If you can move that, maybe that exercise up to when you have maybe 4 LOIs to choose from, might be something intriguing as to, what that might look like if it would, bear any fruit as to, this buyer we think for sure is better. Because obviously when you're selling a company, getting the most amount of money is great, right? But that's not always, the most important thing. There could be some deal structure, or there could be.
It's breaking up a little bit on your side. I don't know if it's mine.
Stop.
All right. Now it's clearer.
Let me just write this down. I gotta write this time down. All right. It's not letting me stop it. So we're just going to continue on. I don't know what's going on. I think my internet's not being my friend right now.
You were talking about moving higher up the chain. So before you get locked into LOI, you got three buyers who are interested. Yeah.
So yeah, I wonder if, as you're looking at buyers, like I said, deal structure is a big thing. It's not always, we'd love to get the most money we can, but that's not always possible or feasible. Especially when you're trying to attain value can come in in terms of in or out or rolling equity, or sticking around for another couple of years and getting the second bite at the apple and whatnot. So it's just curious as to if there's an opportunity there to kind of take the work that you do and put it at that point of the process, if that would make any sense.
Yes, and say here's how you could get value. Here are the synergies in the way they run their business and you run their business, and this is where it might make sense to lean into from a seller perspective. I think it could be interesting. We haven't had the opportunity yet, but I do think it could be an interesting one to be able to move higher up the value chain and provide value, even earlier in the process. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, early in the process is better because once you get under LOI with one buyer, you lose some of that leverage that you might have as when you have options of, a couple of LOIs. What is the confidence gap in pricing? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the confidence gap is this idea that, and I say this to all of my owners, is that your anxieties and your fears and your worries as a business owner get reflected into your pricing. And this also happens even when you have a pricing team or a finance team that works with products to set prices. Somehow our fears and anxieties and our desire to be conservative gets reflected in our pricing. And so it leads to things like your small business underpricing. If you're a larger business waiting for another business to kind of take ownership of pricing strategy for that market, and you kind of end up in that followership position as opposed to setting and differentiating well. And part of the reason that this lack of confidence happens is because oftentimes we fall prey to what we call the spotlight effect, which is that we feel that all our clients are just waiting around for us to change something about pricing, and then we change one thing about our price, they're going to flip the table, they're going to walk away, right? When the reality is that oftentimes there's a level of perceptual difference. There's a level to which you can play with prices, you can change things, you can introduce new metrics, etc. That's not going to upset your clients, and that's not that they probably even won't notice. There's some studies that have been done around that. But when we talk about this kind of confidence gap, it's this idea that we feel like we don't have as much margin to play with pricing as we actually do in real life. Just going back to the fact that people make so many decisions every day, they're not paying that close attention to price. You do have more leeway to, change things, be creative with price before a customer might get upset and think that you're not providing enough value relative to the price you're asking for.
Do you have an example of like a small change or shift in pricing made a significantly better outcome, whether it's through growth or looking to exit and increasing value?
Yeah, let me give you two examples. So first one was an ed tech company that we worked for. And their whole perspective was they had been selling into schools and they were changing ICT a little bit to sell into parents and students. They felt like those were markets they hadn't really fully explored. And so they came to us and they weren't quite yet ready to change their pricing, but they did want to understand when we're not selling this as a big ticket item, how do we structure it, how do we position it? And so we took their pricing page and we did some research and we rejigged, first of all, just introducing packages. So human beings make decisions relative to reference points. It's hard for us to make a decision in isolation. We always need something to compare it to make a choice. So we took their pricing, we introduced some reference points that their customers could use just in the form of new packages. We structured those packages in such a way that we would get more people to evaluate them and choose the option that we wanted them to choose. We brought the language down, we introduced new names, social norms, a whole range of things from behavioral economics that we introduced to how they do their pricing. And at the end of that work that we did with them, 9 out of 10 people who were choosing to buy from them were choosing the package that we wanted them to choose. Mm-hmm. And so that's a simple example of we didn't really change the price, we just changed how the price was presented, we gave new options, etc. Knowing how the human being makes this how the brain makes those decisions, just by restructuring their pricing, we're able to drive up the sales of the new market that they were trying to enter. So that was one where we didn't really change the price as much as we changed how the price was presented, and that made a dramatic difference. The other one where we've done some work we worked with a coaching company, and they had come to us. They had stagnant revenue for 3 years. So year on year, it didn't matter how much money they were putting into marketing, and it wasn't stagnant revenue, it was stagnant profit. So they were bringing in more upline, but the profit wasn't growing. So all of the money, marketing, etc., nothing was like staying in the bank at the end of the day, really. And so they wanted to understand like what's the leak, what's going on. And so we worked with them to kind of take a deeper look at their packaging and their structure. And one of the things that we did with them was help them understand the way you've sequenced this, your packages doesn't really make sense. Because they had clients who would come in at one level and they kind of had everything structured on a project basis. So your client comes in, they work with us for a while, they exit. And we said, well, there's an opportunity here because you formed such a great relationship with your clients. So the opportunity to get them to roll from one package to the next one to the next one. So think about this as a journey, as opposed to like individual projects that you have to go back and sell to the client over and over again. And so with that, we're able to take all their packages, streamline them, restructure them, create them as journeys that they could move customers across the lifetime of the client with them. And that with us working with them, we had a couple of strategy sessions with them. We didn't have to do any new research on that one, but just us working with them and giving them that kind of perspective, they were able to streamline their package set. And in the time that we have worked with them, they're seeing more revenue coming in. I expect that that's also then going to make an impact on higher profits because they're not offering as many packages as they used to, and they're selling to the exact same customers as opposed to having to go out, waste marketing spend to bring in new customers. So things like that are kind of how we have worked with customers where we haven't even had to go and do original pricing research. I can speak to the times when we have as well.
This episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today. What about like service-based companies, especially, talking about pricing and raising pricing and, client retention and things like that. Anything different, from a service-based company to like more of like we sell this kind of widget kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I recently was having a conversation with a builder about the difference between pricing based off of margin and pricing based off of this is what it costs, and then I'm going to add a couple more dollars to it. And I think that the biggest difference between the service-based businesses where there is some cost overhead, but if you have more control over that versus, let's say, product-based business where you have a lot more fixed costs and also potentially higher variable costs, is that when you're in that product space, you have to pay a lot more attention and a lot closer attention to your costs. A lot of times people will go out and say, we're going to try and introduce a discount so we can get more volume going in our bottom line. And the problem is because your costs are so high, there's a cost to serve a customer. There's a cost to like deliver the product, yes, but also to serve the customer. So every time you introduce a discount, your margin is going to drop. The question becomes, can you actually get in enough volume to make up for that margin drop? And because of the cost involved when you're a product-based business, it's very tricky to find that balance, right? That's why you should work with an expert on that, but it's very tricky to find that balance. So we find that service-based businesses sometimes will have a lot more leeway to play with because just with not having as many costs compared to the, product-based businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there any common psychological things that come up, traps or issues or whatever that buyers fall into maybe during, pricing negotiation or selling negotiation or looking to buy, anything that they're thinking of that you commonly see that maybe we can take, this may sound bad, use to our advantage as we're looking to negotiate the best opportunity and sale price for our clients?
Yeah, the best way, let me give an analogy. So in real estate, when I'm negotiating, so I invest in real estate as well, and when I'm looking to buy a property, especially if I'm buying it from another investor, I can negotiate on the actual price, but I can also negotiate on terms, right? So I might choose to give you a higher price up front, but then much lower terms, interest rates, the years of repayments, etc. At the end of the day, because I can control those different variables, I can be smart and clever and go, okay, why don't I give you a lot more money up front, much lower terms, which means in the long run, I'm going to pay a lot less, but you feel happier as the seller because you're getting this big chunk of money, right? So there's an opportunity to do the same thing and bring that into play when you're thinking through the sales process, the buying process, etc. The real thing is just thinking about how do I structure this in a way where in the long run, looking at this in the long term, there's still upside for me afterwards.
Makes sense. What role does perceived value play in negotiations?
Perceived value is the crux of everything. If there's no perceived value, like there's no point, right? And when we talk about value, what we mean is that your client, your customer, your buyer looks at what you have to offer and says, I will get more out of that than I'm going to pay for it. That's value. That's the simplest definition, right? And so perceived value becomes very important and very interesting because perceived value is where you get to play and influence how your customer perceives you, right? We talked about those different levels of value, whether it's, aspirational or functional or emotional, right? You have the chance to shape how your customer is going to perceive you relative by leaning into which of those value elements. So for example, you are a clothing company, right? You sell plain white t-shirts. You can be the Goodwill, which sells the t-shirts. It's secondhand, but it's going to be $2, I guess, 20 cents. I don't know what the shirts cost at Goodwill. Let's say it's $2. People are going in there for the functional benefit of, I need a white shirt, give me the cheapest one possible. Take. You can be the Gap, and it's still functional, but the brand is a little bit more, hey, we're utilitarian, but like you get good quality out of this, right? You're not just selling the functional benefit anymore. You're selling a little bit of the emotional benefit too. You can get, this quality, it's very nice. You're shopping in a place where it's safe, it's clean, you're not worried about, germs or whatever. You can move that same t-shirt up the line and you're buying it now from Dior or some other place, right? And now the benefit is not just it's a white t-shirt that serves a functional benefit for me. It's aspirational. I'm buying the brand. I'm identifying as somebody who leans into this brand that's big, aspirational, etc. And so when you think about perceived value, the most important thing is to understand how does your client or your customer view your brand. Doing that customer research is critical to understand because again, sometimes there's things that we overlook as the one who creates the goods. You don't know if your customer looks, you might think, oh, we sell this widget, it's, a flat price. It really doesn't take that much to make it. And so we priced it cheap. Whereas your customer is looking at it and saying, this scheduling widget saves me 5 hours of time every month with not having to look at my schedules. I would pay hundreds more for it relative to what they're charging me. Right. So when it comes to perceived value, it is the crux of everything, which is why it's super important to sit down with your clients, sit down with your customer, understand how do they perceive you? What is the value they get from working with you? If they weren't working with you, what alternatives would they use instead? Right? Sometimes we think that our competitors are the only ones we have to keep an eye on, but your competitor might be an intern with Excel who your customer is giving no money to just solve the problem. Right? So understanding the entirety of that ecosystem you're playing with gives you that leeway and gives you the tools to then play around with your perceived value.
I would say an example of that in M&A would be, we always say, other investment banks are our competitors, yes, but one of the biggest competitors we have is what we call the unsolicited offer. I mean, that's just a business owners getting, an offer to buy their company out of, out of the blue. Like they weren't even thinking about selling, but now this person's going to buy my company for $10 million, and I thought it was only worth $5 million. And now they're going to have that one-on-one negotiation seller buyer where you have an intermediary like an M&A advisor who now has comes in, who's got experience in this, kind of levels the playing field with the buyer who's a serial buyer. They've bought into hundreds of companies where the business owners never sold one company in their lives. Who's got the advantage there, right? So that's a perceived value, I think, in our world where I think perceived and real value, just because, if we're doing our job correctly, we're going to give you more options to consider. Structure is going to be different. Now you have options, and you're going to have different fits on the buyers that, might be a better fit than the other. And you don't feel like you're backed into a corner and only having to accept this one offer.
Yeah. And I think that's an important exercise too for the advisors who step into the M&A process, is to understand across the value chain, right? Emotional, functional, aspirational value. Am I hitting on all of those notes when I'm, pitching to a prospective client, right? Am I making sure I'm telling those horror stories of, they sold the business and they were sold too cheaply and they left $20 million on the table, right? Like, how am I hitting those different notes to make sure I can really help this customer or client understand the value of what I bring to them?
Forward, looking ahead and, in the future, and how do you see, just behavioral pricing strategies, behavioral economics, impacting, pricing in these small to medium-sized businesses that we all, and these owners that we work with over the next couple of years? Like, where do you see this going? How important is it? Anything we need to know and look out for that are really going to help us in understanding just behavioral pricing strategies?
Yeah, I think that it's going to become increasingly more important, as with AI kind of leveling the playing field a little bit. And we're starting to see more companies now where their whole job is to introduce price transparency, right? So everyone knows what you charge in one way, shape, or form. It's going to become even more important to think about not just what do we charge, how do we present it, how do we shape it, how do we influence what people are comparing us to and who people are comparing us to. It's going to become increasingly more important. I also see AI is going to start to intersect with some of that work. We recently built a pricing AI for smaller service-based businesses. They want to get a first pass at their pricing because we think this is important to kind of jump on and start to provide value in that space as well. But I think that AI is going to change a lot of things in terms of how much information customers have access to. And when customers have access to your pricing and how you got there and what everybody else is charging, the pressure then becomes, how do I get creative in demonstrating my value and showing that in how in allowing customers to visualize both the price and the value and see me as separated from everybody else. So I think it is going to become more important as we see those pressures create more of a burning platform.
How do you, this question just dawned on me, and one last question. I really appreciate your time, Eddie. How do you look at pricing compared to your competition as opposed to, what are your clients willing to pay?
Competition is kind of it's one of the pillars, right? It's one of the things that you have to take into consideration. But when we're looking at competition, we're not just looking at what do they charge, we're looking at how do they position that price, right? Because as much as possible, we want to somehow be able to differentiate our clients away from the competition. So if we're, for example, talking to a school about doing some work with them, There's another school that is also like them, up the block. How do you separate yourself? What is the tag? How do you kind of create that differentiation and create a moat? With competition, when we look at competition, we're also thinking about things like switching costs. How easy or how hard is it for your client or your people who work with you to move from you over to the other person? Because then that's also going to impact and inform what you charge and how you charge. So competition is kind of it's the first start. It kind of gives us a little bit of context, but then there's a lot more depth we want to go through to understand what domains are you actually competing against and how do you differentiate yourself so people aren't comparing you apples to apples.
I lied. One more question. How do you view, when you're looking at a business owner looking to sell their company, is there anything with pricing strategy that might vary based on the type of buyer that we're looking at? Because a lot of times you have a strategic buyer, which, obviously it can be another business within your own industry and maybe a competitor of yours. Are they a good fit to buy my company? Or you've got a financial buyer. It could be a family office, could be a private equity firm, a high net worth individual. Do you see anything with a difference of buyer types, anything with pricing strategy? Do you see anything differing from one to the other?
I think that if you've got a strategic buyer who's coming in and looking at this as an opportunity to expand the portfolio, expand their holdings, grow their own company, they're keeping a close eye on your pricing strategy to understand how do we embed this into our existing ecosystem, right? And so in that context, it becomes very important to be able to say, we've done the pricing research, we know what the upside is, we've spoken to customers, we know what their willingness to pay is, we know what the alternatives are. Here you go, right? We've done the work for you. Whereas if it's more of a financial buyer and you think that it's going to be, they're going to buy you, hold you for a while, and then kind of exit as quickly as possible, the conversation is a lot more on the here's where we are right now, here's what we offer, here's what the price is, and maybe there's potential kind of down the line. Yeah. So I think that you wouldn't necessarily be changing your pricing because you've got the buyers circling as much as it is how am I presenting the prices to them and what am I talking to them about with regards to upside and how customers perceive working with the company and perceive our own prices as well.
Eddie, this has been great. I really appreciate you joining. Where can our listeners learn more about you and the great work that you're doing, or how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so we have a free pricing playbook if folks want to pick that up and learn more about if you're thinking about raising your prices, if you want to know how to do this pricing research yourself or get started on it. It's going to be at playbook.decisionalpha.co. And if you also want to take a look at that pricing AI I mentioned, if you're a service-based business, it's called Fred. So that's going to be at fred.decisionalpha.co. And I think the links will probably be in the show notes as well.
Yes, we absolutely can put the links in the show notes so you guys can click on that and check out the great work that Eddie and her team at Decision Alpha are doing. And just looking at how they look at pricing strategy and the behavioral economics of that and how that can impact your business, whether you're looking to grow or exit. Eddie, thank you so much for joining here today. That's all we have for this episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. Pass it on to anybody who you think might benefit here from our conversation. And make sure to tune in every Thursday morning for a brand new episode each and every week. Until next time, everybody, take care. Thank you. All right. It's
99%.
I'm a little nervous here. I will be honest with you that I'm not able to stop the recording. So I click on stop.
There's no stop.
It's just not doing it. So I don't know what that's never happened to me before.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed that nothing happened with our recording, and I'd hate to have you do it again, which is that only happened one other time to me. But something is funny with my Riverside here, and so I think what I will ask you to do is you can log out of Riverside, but keep your internet browser open.
Okay.
For maybe 10-ish minutes just to make sure it finishes uploading. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to actually completely get out of Riverside and come back in just to check on it in like 5 minutes. Yeah. But I will let you know. I'll shoot you an email and let you know, like, hey, we're good, or something's wrong.
I'm also happy to just turn off video and audio and let it do what it needs to do without logging in and coming back. Do you prefer that?
I'm thinking that it's going to just keep doing what it's doing if we're logged in. Like, I think if we log out, it'll actually stop. You know what I memean? Okay. So that's kind of what my thought process is. But yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking initially too. Is like, let's just leave it here. But I think I need to, the hard reboot of your phone, just to reset your phone, turn it off, turn it back on.
Okay. So I will exit and I will not close the browser, and we'll see what happens.
Correct. Yep. I will do the same, and then I'll shoot you an email and just let you know what
All right.
happens.
Well, fingers crossed.
All right. Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate it. Take
Bye.
care. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.